Genesis 45 verse number 1 says, "Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him. And he cried, Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence." Genesis chapter number 45, we see here that Joseph now is revealing his identity to his brothers. And you can imagine probably the emotions on his part, but then the emotions on his brothers' parts when this happens. All this time, they thought they'd been dealing with a stranger. They thought they'd been dealing with an Egyptian, a man that they thought maybe was against them. And then they saw that he seemed to start act favorably to them. And now he reveals himself to them. And what must have went through their minds? Can you put yourself in their position for just a minute? Maybe it was, oh, it's Joseph. Oh, no, it's Joseph. We tried to kill him. We sold him as a slave. What does this mean? Can you see the terror that struck their hearts? At first it was disbelief, then there was confusion, and now fear. Because remember, the last time they saw him, probably a cry for help. Hey, guys, I'm hungry down here. Guys, why are you selling me off? Like, hey, what are you doing to me? And now you have a man sitting here that all he could just have him killed, right? I mean, remember, he's second in charge. He's the governor of Egypt. He's second in command, just below Pharaoh. So no one's going to question much why he did what he did. I mean, remember, his position is favored in Egypt. He's literally saving the lives of hundreds and thousands of people. So they're not going to bat an eye if he says, hey, these guys did this, it's over. So can you imagine the thoughts that's running through the minds of the brothers? You say, well, how do you know that? Well, because of what they'll say later, more than once. These guys are scared now. And so, but notice here, the weeping. Notice I think the weeping is sorrow and joy all mixed together. Because remember, he's not been able to show how he really feels all this time. He's not been able to express maybe the anguish and the joy that he has inside. And now he cannot contain himself anymore. Remember, his brothers had sold him. They had shown hatred to him, and now he's revealing himself. At this point, Joseph had received more than adequate proof that his brothers had changed their character. They'd shown that with how they treated Benjamin at the dinner that was prepared. They'd shown that in that they'd come back. Judah had shown very much, exemplified the desire to trade his life for his brother's life. He had shown that. There was plenty of proof that these men are not the same people that they once were. And this test, if you will, had been successful. In fact, Joseph, because of his position, is able to bestow much blessings on his brothers and upon his father. And you know what that shows us? Instead of using our power, our position, if God gives you a position of authority and power, instead of using it to do what you want, maybe to pay back or to show hatred and unkindness, maybe you should take that position and use it to bestow blessings. Maybe you should take that position to bestow kindness and Christian character. Far too often we use our position, people abuse their position to get what they want, even if it means stepping all over someone else. That's not the life of Joseph. Joseph, he trades hatred and unkindness for blessing. He does show what Christian character ought to be, even though he's not a Christian. Folks, it's going to be a number of years before Christ comes. This man lives in Genesis chapter 45, but he is acting out he's exemplifying the character of what a Christian should be. How's that? Because he knows the God of this Bible. Now, his position requires him to put out the Egyptians. Remember, this position, this is a private matter. If he had let the Egyptians stay in there, they would have found out what his brothers had done to him. He said, well, didn't they not know? No. All this time, he had kept it secret. You know something else that also shows? Is that when a brother offends, before you tell the world, why don't you deal with that privately, and it stays a private matter. It's not until it cannot be kept a private matter do you tell everyone. Notice what he did here? I think there's multiple reasons, and I'll give you one. One is what I just mentioned. Number two, because of his position, it begged it to be a private matter, in that he is governor of Egypt. He did not need to, so quote unquote, air his laundry to the whole Egyptian population. But the other thing is, again, he kept a family matter private from the world. What his brothers did, he did not tell the lowest servant. He put them out. And he dealt with it between him and them. That's another mark of Christian character. You know what we usually try to do? Well, you know what such and such did to me, blah, 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 and then half the world knows it. Why? Because we want to feel the power of hurting that one that hurt us. But that's not what Joseph did. He kept it private between him and his brothers. In fact, obviously their father knew something had happened. Maybe they told him the entire story later, but we're not told that. What we're told, as far as their father knew, they may have mistakenly thought he was dead, right? Maybe they never told him the entire story. He kept it between him and his brothers. That is Christian character. That is godly character that's coming from a man that doesn't have the Psalms of David, that doesn't have the writings of Paul, doesn't have the writings of Moses, right? What's our excuse? Because we're carnal. He protects his brothers, even though they never protected him. Proverbs 25:9 says, "Debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and discover not a secret to another, lest he that heareth it put thee to shame, and thine infamy turn not away." Matthew 18:15 says, "Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother." What if he had turned around and showed them, what if he had shown them evil for evil? Well, he wouldn't have saved them alive. He said, well, this was all supposed to happen. Yeah, but God still used Joseph's free will. Do you understand God uses your free will to perform His will in the outcome? It was still Joseph making the decision to do what he did. We're not robots. God still used Joseph's free will to perform His will. That's why we need to walk with God. He said, well, God can do what He wants to do. Well, if that attitude and you're not willing, He's not going to do it through you. Do you want to be a vessel for the Lord? Do you want to perform what He wants you to do? The best thing you can do is get in tune with God and walk with God. And one of the places it starts is through this book and in prayer with the Lord. And if you're in tune and you're walking with Him, isn't it be a wonderful thing to find out one day that, hey, because of my free will, I was able to do this for the Lord and this for the Lord and this for the Lord, and it performed what He wanted, and there's this huge outcome that came from it. Instead, we just say, I don't care. Okay, fine. Don't expect any rewards. How about we get in step with the Lord and in love with the Lord and walk with the Lord? Why wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to find out that because of my free will, because of me choosing the right thing, this person was blessed, and this person was blessed, and this person went on to do this great thing, and wouldn't it be? But instead, we get so carnal. I got to keep moving. We got 3 chapters to go through, and this is not a good start. But listen, we can't let this pass. This is why people say, well, that's just so archaic. And what has that portion of the Bible got to do with me? A lot. If we'll just let the Lord show us through His Holy Spirit, say, hey, what about that? What about that right there? How are you doing? Maybe we need to park there a while. Maybe you just need to think about that. Well, I know Joseph's a powerful type of Christ, but he's also just a very powerful character in general that we can learn from if we'll just let the Lord show us. Now notice here, Joseph, verse number 3, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? He wants to know, hey, has anything changed? Is Dad still alive? Is he well? Guys, and they're just standing there. Can you see it? Guys, you okay? You're Joseph, right? No, you say, well, what? Notice verse number 3. And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. They're not talking. Why? They're in disbelief and they're scared. That's the problem. Verse 4, and Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Folks, that is a powerful set of verses. Do you know what he could have said? You sold me into slavery, so now you're going to rot here the rest of your life. That's not what he says. Is be not grieved with yourselves. Grieved with ourselves? You're the one that went into slavery, grieved. He's more concerned about their well-being than what has happened to him for the last 20 plus years of his life. We would want to plant somebody that did that to us. We'd want to get payback. That's not Joseph. Joseph says, be not grieved with yourself. You're concerned about us. How little time do we how often were we like that? Someone cuts us off in traffic and we want to shove them off the bridge. Joseph just lost years of his life to slavery and jail. And what is he concerned about? Fellas, don't be grieved with yourselves. Don't be worried. Really? There's a different spirit about Joseph. It's a spirit we all should have. But carnality rules, doesn't it? We want to get payback. We want someone else to feel as hard as we felt. In fact, sometimes we take it out on someone that never did it to us. Because we get it when we're young, or we get it with somebody and we turn around and it manifests itself with our hatred and our bitterness to those that never did anything wrong to us. We're concerned about us. We're concerned about me. Pride takes hold. And listen, if pride's taken hold and bitterness is taken hold, you better drive that far from yourself with God's power, because it will ruin your relationships. Joseph has no bitterness of what his brothers did to him, and he has every reason to be bitter. But because of his bitterlessness, God's able to perform a miracle. Wonder how many miracles and work of God that we miss because of our attitudes and our bitterness and our pride. And folks, when I say that, that's me too. Okay? I'm not standing up here like I know it all, and I don't ever let that happen. But how many days do we miss? Let me just say this, and we'll move on. How many days of blessings do we miss because we get up with a bad attitude, we get mad about something the day before, and we let it rule our lives, and it ruins a blessing in that day that we could have experienced? Let that sink in for just a minute. I know, because I'm flesh too. We let things bother us and rule us, and we miss a blessing in our life because we let it control us for that day. It's quiet, and that's okay. I know we're a quiet church, and I get that. I hope it means that maybe it's resonating. Because we live there sometimes, don't we? We let months go by that way. Sometimes we let years go by that way. And we miss a blessing that's sitting in front of us. Don't take the low road every day and let it rule you, because you're going to miss a blessing. You say, well, life's hard. Life's always going to be hard. Learn the little blessings in it. And I know I'm off a little bit, but I'm not, because Joseph exemplifies bitterlessness and care and concern and everything that a Christian ought to show. He's not grieved. He's like, look, this was God's plan. God used it. God used it to save much people alive. So if God got the glory, then fine. Verse 5, now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Verse number 6, so what does he turn to? He mentions it and he moves on. You know what we like to do sometimes? We like to stay there. And we like to fester. He moves on. He says, look guys, don't let it bother you. Now, let me get down to business, why it's so important that you listen to me now. Verse number 6, for these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in the which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. You know what he just said? This was all a part of God's plan. Guys, it wasn't even you. It was part of God's plan. So don't worry about it. You notice he's emphasizing that. Why? Because we're hard-headed. He keeps emphasizing it was God. It was God. It was God. You know what he's trying to tell his brothers? Forget the past now. Let's move on. I'm not mad. It's over. Let's move on. Let's go ahead for saving our lives, and let's move on for God. Sometimes that's what we need to do. Doesn't mean that you necessarily forget it, but let a hurt, let a change in your life, let a problem in your life heal. There'll always be scars, and don't necessarily forget it. Because, sometimes it's harsh that we say, well, just forget what happened. No, sometimes there's things in life you can't forget what happened. Right? But instead of forgetting about it, let it be a springboard that says, you know what? From that experience, let me help someone else. Let me say, okay, yeah, I went through this, but God got me through it. And there's still times it's hard, and there's still times things that happen where I'm reminded about it. But instead of letting it be a defeat, let it be a strength. Because I sometimes think that because we don't experience something and we tell someone else, I'll just get over it. That's rough. That's harsh. Sometimes you can't get over something. Sometimes it's something in your life that'll always be a scar that is there. It's like you hurt yourself so bad that there's always going to be a scar there. Say you cut yourself so hard in the arm or somewhere, you look at it and remember that experience. But instead of it being an experience and it destroy you, let it heal and let God use it to heal someone else. In verse number 8, and he hath made, and that's the Lord, he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast, and there will I nourish thee. For yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. Now notice some things here. Joseph delivers a message to be given to his father. He says, look, I need you to take this back to Dad and let him know, hey, come down out of Canaan and come and stay with me that you might live. The other thing that we see here is that it's important that they go back and report to their father. He says, look, we've heard it with our mouth, we've seen it with our eyes, but you're going to notice here in just a few minutes, and not just that, he's going to give some other visual as well as vocal testimonies that it is Joseph. There's not going to be any rock unturned. There's not going to be anything left to guess, because he knows his father's going to need physical proof that it's him. But the brothers here are eyewitnesses of the goodness of Joseph and eyewitnesses that it's him. Now, what you see happen here is now, remember, Joseph has been speaking to them up to this point with an interpreter. But notice what he says here in verse number 15, 16, verse number 13. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. But he's noticed here, verse number 10, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. He tells them, he says, it is Joseph's voice, it's my voice that thou hearest. Do you know what he did? When he put the servants out, he didn't have an interpreter. He had to speak to them in Hebrew. Do you realize that? Up to this point, he has been speaking to them through an interpreter. He puts all the servants out and he begins to speak to them. That's another reason why they're in shock, but now they hear his voice. See, before he changed his mannerisms, he had changed it. He was speaking to them through Egyptian, but now he reveals himself as their brother, and he starts speaking to them in their language. It's some confirmations. How does this man know Hebrew? What's going on? But you know what? It's all proof of who he is. Number one, you see that they can see that it's him. If they look closely at Joseph, they could identify his resemblance. If they look closer, they could see some other things. It was only when they saw him as a ruler of Egypt, they missed the recognition that it was Joseph. However, now they are urged to do so in order to prove that it's him. It's Joseph. You know, Joseph is a type of Christ. You know, God has ever given us proofs of himself and his work to us. Think about it. We have his word. He speaks to us. We see creation. I don't know if you had the opportunity to see Friday night a light show that's very rare in this part of the country, part of the world. But my wife and I stepped out on the front porch and looked up, and there was the Northern Lights. Folks, that was just amazing. Right above us, because we're out in the country and there's not much city lights, we're looking around. At first, it's just on the horizon if you look north, and then later we're looking and it's streaking across the sky. You got pinks, you got purples, you got blues, you got greens. We look above us and it's literally moving in the sky. It's like a ribbon. It was right above the house. You know, it obviously, to our perspective, is right above the house, and it's literally moving like it's alive. God does that. Isn't it amazing? It's an amazing thing. We have a master architect, and boy, he does things that's just beautiful. I mean, when do you see pinks and purples and greens in the sky? That's amazing. Most of the time you got to drive to Canada or Alaska for something like that. You can Friday night you can step out and see it. That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. From the most intricate butterfly's wing to a night sky that's full of light, that's God. And you know, the Bible tells us that it's him speaking, that there is something greater than man, that there is a creator of all things. And that's our Lord. The other thing that you see is the proof in the sound. We have the voice of Joseph, but then there's also him that speaks. And verse number 12, he says, "It is my mouth that speaketh unto you." If they would listen, they could maybe, you talk to someone that's in the same family, sisters or brothers, and you start listening, and sometimes I know my wife, there's been folks that, especially sometimes you'll hear them talking out in the next room, and sometimes they sound a lot alike. I wonder if when Joseph took away the mask, if you will, that he just let himself speak the way he would, and maybe they could hear that, oh, Benjamin and Joseph sound the same. It's my mouth that speaketh unto you. The Lord has a mouth. We have His Word. Right? In fact, the Word of God became flesh and dwelt among us. And the apostles were able to hear the voice of God as they stood there with Him. He not only spoke their language, but if they listened closely, they would likely could hear the familiarity of His voice. Mary, in John chapter 20, recognized the Master's voice once He called her name. It was when He called her name. Remember, she thought it was the gardener. She thought it was the one taking care of the garden there. And when He spoke her name, she knew it was Him. The Master's voice this morning? His Word. How often do we sometimes get troubled and we know the Lord's trying to deal with us and we just try to put it off, right? But we know it's Him troubling our heart about something. We know when He's speaking. Now notice here, Joseph will reach out to his father through his brethren here. Verse number 14, we see that he falls upon his brother's Benjamin's neck and he weeps, and Benjamin in turn weeps upon his neck. We see in verse number 15 here it says, "And moreover he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him. And the fame thereof was heard from Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, This do ye, lade your beast, and go, get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye, take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Also regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours." Pharaoh hears about this, and he says, "Joseph, your brothers are here? This is wonderful." Why do you think Joseph's happy? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, Pharaoh loves Joseph. Joseph's been nothing but good for Pharaoh. Likely they've formed a relationship with each other that's very close. And he says, aren't you happy when your brother or your brethren, your friend, something great happens to them? That's what it's like to Pharaoh. He says, this is wonderful news. Another thing is you find out is that he's got an identity again. Hey, Joseph's got brothers. Hey, come, please come. We'll give you the best of the land. Far different from the Pharaoh of Exodus chapter 1, isn't it? Well, what a difference a righteous leader makes, isn't it? He looks and goes, this is wonderful news. Joseph, pull out all the stops. Whatever you want to do. Hey, take some wagons, take some animals, get some food up there, and bring your father back in style. And bring him into the land, and I want to meet him. It's a blessing. This Pharaoh loves Joseph. Because he loves Joseph, he loves the people of Joseph. When a leader loves the Lord, he loves the people of the Lord. When a leader knows God, he loves the people of that God. So when you have a righteous leader that loves Christ, in turn he ought to love the people of Christ, right? Makes a difference. Makes a wonderful difference. Now, what happens? Well, they bring all this stuff. Verse number 20, Pharaoh says, don't even worry about the stuff you have. The good of all the land is yours. Verse number 22, Joseph here, he gives them wagons. He gives according to the commandment of Pharaoh. Again, this is the commandment of Pharaoh happening here. Something else you find, you think about it just in type. Joseph is a type of Christ. because we have Christ, everything that belongs to the Lord is going to be ours, right? Everything that God has, He says, hey, one day you'll come and live with me, it's yours. Verse number 23, and to his father he sent after this manner 10 asses laden with the good of the things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with the corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way. And they went up out of Egypt, and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor of all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed in them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons, which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. I think at first Joseph was like, no, don't play tricks on me. No. I don't, no, I can't take this. But then he sees the wagons. He had to have visual proof that something truly was different. And those wagons and all those things from Egypt confirmed what they were saying. That was important. Joseph had to send some proof back. And it proved it to Jacob that yet Joseph was alive. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Verse number 46, chapter number 46, and Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine head. Now what's going to happen is the Lord's going to give him some prophecy of what's going to happen. We're also going to see in chapter 46 that the Lord names all those that go down into Egypt, and the names of those individuals, as well as some of the generations up to this point. What you do see is, though, I want to point out, is that the Lord here is confirming with Jacob that it was okay to go down to Egypt. Now, Jacob is, I think he's nervous to go down. I think he's also still almost got a pessimistic attitude in that he says, I will go down to Egypt and I'll die. I'll see my son and then die. He's just, if you will, he's that Christian that is in a low spot. And we have to watch ourselves. We get there. We get to a point where we're so down that we down everything around us. Jacob's kind of at that point. He says, I'll go down to Egypt and see my son and die. Now that's going to happen, but it's not going to happen as fast as he thinks, right? We think, I'm going to die any day. You really got that attitude? Come on. Pick yourself up off the floor, dust yourself off, and go again, right? But here's what the Lord does. The Lord confirms, and in this I have to praise, Jacob goes and he sacrifices to God in Beersheba, and the Lord says, Jacob, it's okay to go down. Why do you think that was important? Well, remember, when Abraham went down, he picked up some baggage he shouldn't have picked up. Some others had went down, there was some issues. Do you know what this shows us? That it's important to pray about everything. He goes and sacrifices and prays to God, and God answers him and says, hey, Jacob, it's okay to go down. And notice he says, Jacob, Jacob. There are 7 times in Scripture where a person's named double by the Lord. You have it with Abraham. You have it with Moses at the burning bush. You have it with Samuel, where Samuel's as a boy in the temple or tabernacle at that point, and the Lord calls out to him to do something. You have where Jesus calls out, says to Martha, Martha, thou art troubled about much. It's a turning point. It's an important part, a point and point, an important spot in that person's life. And in fact, you see it with Simon when he says, Simon, Simon, the devil has desired to sift thee as wheat. And you also have it with Saul, where you have Christ there Saul's on the road to Damascus, and he calls out to him twice. Whenever you see that, it's an important event in that person's life. In this case, this is a very important event in the life of Jacob, because it's going to be that point where they're going down, and there the Lord's going to make a great nation, And finally, they're going to come up out of Egypt as a strong and mighty nation. But Jacob's got to listen to the Lord. And you know what? The Lord, maybe He's trying to get a hold of you. Or maybe He's trying to talk to you through His Word. Maybe He's trying to let you know something in your own life that you need. Hey, I need your attention. He's not going to talk to you in an audible voice. Sometimes I will say there's times where you feel like the Lord has, not audibly, but you know the Lord's working in your heart and you need to listen. Each time in these individuals, it was a significant event in that person's life. Here we see the Lord confirms these promises again. Why? It was important for Jacob to be reminded of the promises because he's getting ready to move to Egypt, and it was likely going to trouble him. He's leaving the land that God had told him he would inherit, that his people would inherit. He needed some confirmation. The Lord says, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt. Why? Because this is part of my plan. There's times in our life where sometimes we wonder, like, Lord, what has this got to do with the plan you have for my life? Like, why am I making this detour? But maybe it's part of God's plan in your life to detour you, to do something in your life, to actually strengthen you for the work that He has for you. It was only after God told him to go down that he went down with his little ones, his wives, the wagons, and all these things. Now, let me see here. We've got to move down. Verse number 26, this is all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives. All the souls were 66, and the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph. Now, I thought this was interesting. Remember, we said how that it changed from Reuben to Judah. Judah, notice who he sends ahead. Judah. Why? Because Judah is now taking the leadership. He is that one that would take that role as leader of the household. Because remember, it passed from Reuben to Judah. He's direct his face into Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen, and Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him, and fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. And Joseph said unto his brethren, unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are coming to me. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds, and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and ye shall say, What is your occupation? That ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, and that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So, chapter number 47. Chapter number 47. Verse number 1, it says, Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. And they said moreover unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are coming unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and thy brethren to dwell. And the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father, and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now, let me say this about this presentation of his brothers. Remember, shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. But did you notice that didn't deter Pharaoh? Aren't we reminded that when a man is a godly man, he's at even peace with his enemies? Right? Isn't it interesting that that did not deter Pharaoh? In fact, what did Pharaoh say to Joseph? If any of them are men of activity, you know what he's looking for? Hey, if there's any of your brothers that are like you, I want them to be a part of my court. I want them to do some work for me, because I know they're going to do it to the letter. That's a testimony. How about us? people of testimony, people of character. You know what it ought to be? That, hey, if you got anybody like yourself at your church, I could use them. Remember, Pharaoh's a man of the world, if we will, but he's looking at it and going, hey, they could be good for me. If they work as hard as you work, I want them. That's a testimony. Now notice verse number 8. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. You see a couple of things. Pharaoh lets Joseph get the best of the land for his brothers and his father. Only the best. Folks, that's the Lord working. That's the Lord working on the behalf of His people. You know what the Lord does for us many times? The Lord blesses us more than we could ever ask or think. We ought to be reminded of that. We ought to be reminded that the Lord takes care of us. The other thing that we see is that Joseph continues to take care of his father, his brothers, his household, just as the Lord takes care of us. What a blessing to see the working of the Lord in the life of Joseph, but what a testimony for us that the Lord's taking care of us.